Today's guest is Mustafa Ibrahim. Mustafa currently spearheads global marketing data at HelloFresh. With a robust background in marketing science and customer analytics, he leverages data-driven strategies on the daily to optimize unit economics and drive product expansion. Here are 3 things that I learned from Mustafa: how different sectors and industries approach marketing science, the idea of agility over specialization, and finally, educating teams about the significance of testing in marketing strategies. So let's get into it. All right, Mustafa, very excited to have you on our podcast. This is going to be a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of knowledge packed in your experience and in your brain. So thank you for joining us. So I'm going to start off with a fun question for you. So you've been in data products for a large part of your career in marketing. And the question I have for you is, if you had to create a data product from scratch, inspired by a movie or a TV show, what would that be and why?
Okay, that's a great question. First off, thanks for having me. I like Black Mirror. I'm not sure if you've seen the TV show. I'm a huge fan of Black Mirror. Also, I'm as someone that has been managing teams for more than 10 years. I'm becoming a lot more conscious about the importance of psychological safety at workplaces. So if I were to build a data product inspired by a TV show or movie, I would build a psychological safety index based on, it would be an AI driven platform in my opinion, but it would basically be a combination of biometric data, employee interaction analysis, and real-time sentiment analysis to understand how people are doing and how much are they feeling when it comes to psychological safety within the organization, and try to optimize for their psychological safety at workplace. So that's something that inspires me to make sure that we are creating the right environments or building the right environments for our people.
What a wonderful twist on Black Mirror. I love this. We talk about psychological safety all the time, and it's usually very dystopian. So to hear this spin on really creating a safe environment is really, really interesting. That's very cool. I hope somebody's working on this idea somewhere. Okay, so when we jumped on, you mentioned you're actually, this is the first week of Ramadan. Tell us about that. What does that look like at work for you? Because, it's a special time for your culture, and it must be quite challenging. So how do you cope with that, and what does that look like day to day? What do you have to change in your routine?
Yeah. So I've been living in Europe for about 10 years now. I think doing Ramadan in Europe is different than doing it with your family in Egypt or in your home country, because of the fact that first, workplaces in countries or Muslim countries give you reduced working hours during Ramadan, while in Europe this is not the case. So I had to do a lot of self-calibration when I moved to Europe, and I did my first Ramadan here. That being said, the key changes that we would have while fasting or while doing Ramadan is that first, your sleep cycle is different because you have to wake up at night to have your last meal before you start fasting. As you can imagine, in the first week of Ramadan, it takes you probably some time to accept or calibrate the fact that you're not going to be having foods or water halfway through the day. So for me, I think aside from the sleep cycle, to be honest, I enjoy being at the office during Ramadan, because for me, this is one way to actually make use of the time, because otherwise, if you stay home, then you will feel the time a lot more than being in meetings and in conversations with people. Second is the fact that being in a workplace that appreciates the diversity is very important. So I think I haven't been in a single company where I felt that it's not inclusive enough for people that are doing Ramadan. So oftentimes, if I need to take time off, I have the option to take that time off. And I get a lot of reassurance from people that they understand that sometimes I'm not, at least in the first weeks of Ramadan, I'm not fully focused or productive. But it's a good experience. It's a good experience to do it even outside or away from your home country. mainly because of the fact that workplaces are different.
Glad to hear that. That's awesome. And yeah, obviously, sort of, I grew up in India, and we definitely saw this. And what's interesting is fasting as a thing is making a big resurgence, right, in the fitness and nutrition sort of world. And you think about, like, it's baked into the culture in so many parts of the world, right? It's baked into the culture in your part of the world, in my part of the world, and so it's becoming more mainstream anyway for all the health benefits. And of course, it's a really interesting. Okay, so that was a tangent, but I wanted to kind of talk about it because I think our audience might enjoy it. So you've been in consumer, in fashion, in media, in travel, in fintech, and now in food. And you've done sort of marketing, you've done data, you've done sort of growth and analytics. Is there a category or team that you found has just nailed marketing science, or do you think that every category is learning at the same pace?
Yeah, that's a great first question. I think the landscape of marketing across these different industries or categories varies based on certain parameters. I usually break them down to, I would say, 4 or 5 parameters that I look at. First, the nature of the products, because that decides how you do marketing. Um, the amount of spends or the market dynamics that you have as well for that product. Third is the competition level. Are you part of a company? Are you actually investing your time on a product where you're actually dominating the market, or is it early stage and you're still getting to the markets? Business maturity. How mature is your business when it comes to data, when it comes to marketing, when it comes to operational marketing? And last but not least, the data point that you are collecting for your marketing science models. The key differentiator here is the pace of learning and adoption. So, media and fintech, for example, they are at the forefront of leveraging a lot of data points and machine learning, while fashion and foods are still catching up because they have been reliant on traditional marketing, so to say, right? So you'll see a lot of offline ads for fashion and foods, and as you can imagine, that introduces a new challenge when it comes to marketing science itself. So innovation in marketing science at the end often comes from companies being willing to experiment and adapt quickly to changing behaviors and marketing tactics. This is the deciding factor of nailing marketing science, in my opinion. So I would say it's domain agnostic. It's more of on the how fast is your company willing to experiment and learn and adapt quickly.
That's a great point, and I think something you said really resonated, which is there are certain categories that are more used to leveraging data just because of the nature of what they do, right? So if it's completely digital or if it's completely, SaaS or what have you, then they're just naturally built that way as a business. And companies that maybe or categories where you have much more sort of offline, they're still kind of catching up a little bit to sort of the digitization of all of the marketing channels. Okay, that's interesting. So you've been in the industry and in this function for more than a decade, and you've probably seen all of the tech that's out there, right? There's a bunch of open source, there's a bunch of vendors, there's large legacy companies, there's obviously startups like ours, and it feels like it's still quite hard to answer some of these basic questions around marketing effectiveness and efficiency. Why do you think that is? Like, why hasn't this been a solved problem like some of the other, technology functions?
Yeah, yeah. I would say two major reasons, in my opinion. The first reason being is that tech is consistently outpacing business maturity. Like, if you look at the pace by which you're seeing new technologies versus how long it takes company to be mature with data and marketing, tech will always outpacing business maturity. And the pressure that a lot of companies have now or feel now makes them go after the quick wins and often miss the target states that they should aim for. And what's needed work backward from the target states to achieve something that can scale. This is probably one of the main reasons why tech is still outpacing a lot of companies. Second is with the rise of machine learning and artificial intelligence, a lot of companies get distracted by that. So I think there's a lot more foundational work that needs to be done first before you adopt your machine learning or AI in your own company with your own data to build use cases and application for that. So, and oftentimes founders or executive teams, they have some basic questions. So they are not waiting for your data science team to give them the fanciest answer about predicting the future. No, they have questions about what happened last week. So the what's and the why and how can we avoid that in the future. And the reality is that if you're not going to be doing the basic foundational work to define the right metrics, agree with the business on what you're optimizing for, have the right data sources, have the right dashboards, then you don't need machine learning. At that point of time, you would invest your time to fix the foundations than getting distracted by machine learning and AI. These are, I would say, the two reasons that I think why tech is outpacing us.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that resonates deeply with me, because to your point, right, you can get distracted by new technology, and this happens in pretty much every function, right? Whether you take finance or data or marketing or engineering, there's all this new technology. There's this shiny new object syndrome, but if you don't have the basics in terms of measuring what matters, right, and aligning with your executive team, with your marketing team on those things and setting a good foundation, then everything else doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's a great segue into my next question about what do you think that foundation looks like? What is, right, if you're like let's just pick a, stage $100 million revenue company, what do you think are the fundamental parts of the marketing data stack or tech stack that you should have as a foundation before you do, advanced stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I tend to flip that question on its head, and I try to think about this from consumer standpoint or from customer standpoint or stakeholder standpoint. So, because a lot of, especially in marketing is probably one of the most complex functions in your company because of the diversity of data sources that you have, the very short feedback loop that you have with the marketing team, and the fact that you have certain regulations and limitations on the data that is being collected. So for me, I tend to look at this as a product, not as a service. So who's my customer? Who's my stakeholder? What are the biggest pain points that they have? What is the priority, business value based of these pain points? When should I tackle them? And what is the cost benefit analysis of tackling them in house versus outsourcing? If I'm able to answer these 5 questions, then I think I'm going to be getting a lot better background story to inform my business of what is the tech stack that we need to build from the ground up or from scratch. I think, for example, let's pick reporting as one of the examples. Even if you have done the greatest job agreeing on the right metrics, having the right lake house or having the right data warehouse, but you have a lot of questions that you're not aware of coming from the marketing team, and you don't have the right reporting tool that you can use to answer these questions, then you'll end up being in that loop of receiving a lot of questions and not answering them with the same pace. Then that will create frustration between management teams and your data teams and the marketing teams. So if I'm able to answer these 5 questions and align them with management, it makes my job as a data lead much easier, in my opinion.
That is a fantastic answer. I was not expecting that, so that's wonderful to hear. And to your point, like treating the entire data tech stack as a product that is trying to answer the key questions of your customers. That's a great way to think about the tech stacks. It's not about the details of, oh, I need this CRM or CDP or ETL or machine learning. It's about what are the 5 questions that your CEO, your CFO, your CMO, your line managers are wanting to answer on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, on a quarterly basis, and then being able to architect your tech stack in a way to solve that. Fascinating. Okay. Now, one of the things that's really interesting in the current environment is this, we're talking about Gen AI, we're talking about all of the artificial intelligence stuff that's happening. But if you take a step back and think about it, this movement was going on even before ChatGPT launched. Like AI has been developing for several years, maybe even I can say decades. And one of the early adopters of this were all the ad platforms, right? So if you look at Meta, they had an ML-based, AI-based ad buying sort of, product called Advantage Shopping Plus, I think, if I remember correctly. And then, Google had Performance Max. Actually, Bing just announced that they're doing something very similar to Performance Max. I think they're literally calling it Performance Max on Bing. And I'm sure that every single ad platform is going to have an AI-based, ad buying sort of solution. So my sort of, question to you is, do you think this is going to change how media buyers leverage these platforms? Or do you think that there's still going to be this desire to want to outsmart what the ad platforms are putting out as AI products? Where do you see the balance there?
That's a very good point. I don't think that with the rise of these marketing tactics and the use of machine learning and AI for these platforms specifically, I don't think it's going to be a competition about who's outsmarting who. It's going to be a question about what kind of data points can you use internally to validate the data that you're getting from those platforms. To give you an example, a company might be investing a lot on PMax after the rollout of PMax. And as you can imagine, every app platform, they have their own data attribution model that give them a lot of credits based on certain attribution windows and based on their own parameters. At the end, it's a black box that you cannot really understand. And in often cases, you will see campaigns or channels being scaled under the assumption that based on the platform data, we're seeing a lot of incremental conversions, but on the overall mix, the company is not seeing that coming along, right? So I think what's going to be happening is that we will continue to trust them, but we will calibrate them based on what we believe the reality, because those platforms will continue to be siloed platforms. I mean, if they were not meant to be siloed, then marketing would have been a lot easier for the companies. But I think they are siloed because it is often a fight about credit attribution. So the only impartial party in that is the company itself or your data team. This is the team that looks at how much you're scaling your PMax, how much are you scaling your advantage shopping campaigns, how many unique impressions are you getting, what's your reach, what's your frequency, and how much of an impact it has in your overall mix. If you're not seeing the overall mix getting better, then there's no point of scaling those campaigns because you'll get so many questions from your management team. So I think it's not going to be a question about outsmarting them. It's a question about how can we leverage them the best so that we can maximize the ROI we're getting out of these campaigns.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I agree with you that part of the benefit of having those AI based sort of ad buying tools is then, if you log into Google Ads or Meta Ads, there's so many buttons to click, right? And so you're kind of taking a little bit of the complexity from a media buyer's UI UX and saying, hey, let Meta do the heavy lifting, let Google do the heavy lifting. But assuming that that is somehow going to lead to incremental conversions is the dangerous part. And so I love what you're saying is like, leverage the tools as much as you can, but still keep an eye on the actual incremental conversions. And no better way to do it than your internal team sort of making that decision based on the full impact of the mix. Now, on that note, something that I have been researching is all of these platforms are now sort of launching conversion API capabilities, right? So this is basically getting offline data, and I wouldn't even call it offline data. It's basically first-party data that's completely de-anonymized or hashed and pushing back into the ad platforms. What's really fascinating to me is you can't actually use that conversion API data to set, attribution or conversion goals, if I understand correctly. Why do you think that is? Like, what's going on there?
So I feel like those app platforms want to give you a tool that you feel that you are controlling what you're spending without actually controlling what you're spending. So if there is a way for you to close that feedback loop by feeding a lot of conversion values data and setting goals based on that, then you're going to be doing the job on their behalf. I think they will continue to have that motive of doing that on your behalf with additional data points they're collecting from you. I think if you can actually you can reverse engineer how the bidding system works, in my opinion, if you are able to feed conversion values and targets for smart bidding to see how it works exactly. And this is probably one of the reasons why they're not going to be connecting the two to each other. They will give you the option to provide offline conversions, but they will still have control over the bidding system itself. I'm not sure if you remember, there used to be a lot of data points that companies would collect from auction insights and Google Ads. Auction insights used to be accessible via API, and Google made the call to revoke the access back then, because I used to use auction insight quite extensively to understand exactly what's happening for my CPCs, understanding the quality score of the ads, the drivers of the quality score. Because if you are able to understand this completely and in a deterministic way, then I think you can control the bidding in a way as well.
Got it. Yeah, so that's really fascinating, right? They want to give you control, but not full control, obviously, because it can have a negative impact on the customer experience if you're right, and that's what they're trying to optimize for is the consumer experience on their platforms and giving you a certain amount of control to be able to reach the right people. Okay, awesome. One last set of questions here before we wrap up. So this whole idea of long term, short term, brand versus performance, right? Awareness versus sort of activation. And this is very topical for marketers. How do you measure your brand health? How do you measure the long term impact of your marketing? What's your take on that whole topic? Is it a moot point altogether? Is there legitimacy to it? How would you go about sort of answering that question if your executive team or your board asked about, hey, what's the health of our brand?
I think this is probably one of the toughest questions that any company has when it comes to understanding marketing and the marketing mix, because of a number of reasons. I think the first reason is that brand is very hard to measure when it comes to influence on your performance. The companies can say whatever they want to say, that we are big on brand, we want to make sure that we increase brand awareness. But at the end, if your budget is not materializing into conversions, you're going to be getting a hard time. This is a reality, right? And this is why we have to be very conscious about the short term and medium term, because I believe that there's no company that's looking at the long term. They are thinking between short and medium term, because the market is changing so fast and the competition is changing so fast. So they don't want to risk looking at the long term, because if you make large investment with long-term goals, then the likelihood that this applies after, let's say, 6 months is low. So the way that I tend to look at brand versus performance is that what are we optimizing for exactly? So are we optimizing for conversion generation because we at that stage where we are actually activating a lot of customers and reactivating a lot of customers and retaining a lot of customers? Is it a question about the acquisition? Is it a question about the customer base in general? Because if you are focused on acquisition, then I think only acquisition requires performance. If you are focused on acquisition as well as retention, then you need brands, you need equity, you need people that trust your brands, you need people that come back organically. At that point of time, you need to understand your aided brand awareness, your non-aided brand awareness, its impact on the market share, its impact on the brand impressions you're getting on SEA or search engine. At that point of time, you can correlate the investment that you are making on brands to how much it yields after X number of weeks or X number of months when it comes to retention rates and acquisition rates or conversion rates. So in my opinion, this will continue to be a tough conversation to have, especially because it's not easy to go to executive teams and tell them, hey, we need X millions of budget to invest on brand. And the question you get, okay, what's going to be the ROI? And then you will say, I'm not sure. Probably at some point we'll get some ROI. So this is not an easy conversation to have. But I think what happens is people or some executive teams undermine the negative impact of not spending on brand in the right time. Because if your product becomes a performance marketing machine, then as soon as you pull the plug, there's no way for you to activate users. There's no way to reactivate users, there's no way to retain them organically. So the whole point of organic or brand is that it empowers your organic contribution over the time. So that when you stop or when you lower your investments, because capital is not free anymore, it has become way more expensive. When you pull the plug on performance, you have a leverage in marketing that you still can rely on. So for me, brand is a long-term investment that you are making for your organic contribution rather than being purely a brand discussion.
I like that a lot, actually, right? So you're really looking at the for folks who are familiar with marketing mix modeling, if you think about incremental versus baseline, right, you're really thinking about your brand investments moving your baseline up and to the right over the course of 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And that's not going to show up in a linear regression, but it is going to show up in your overall results in some ways. That's amazing. I like that answer a lot. The last one. You and I talked a few weeks ago, and you were talking about this desire to, bring about sort of this idea of making testing fun within HelloFresh, right? And I love that idea. I love that concept so much that we've taken it to heart and sort of made it an internal motto, right, for us at Paramark is make testing fun for our customers, for our users. And the question that I will leave you with is what steps are you taking internally to make that happen in your business? Are there a couple of things that you're doing to achieve that mission and purpose of making testing fun?
I think if we want to make testing fun for marketing teams, we have to educate them first about why this is important and why this is helping the company and them to answer questions that without testing they're not going to be getting the right deterministic answers for. So for me, testing is educational problem in the first place. So if I manage to explain in MMM or Media Mix model context why testing is very important, then I think I'll get a lot of buy-in from marketing to invest on it. But it's not an educational problem only for the marketing team. It's an educational problem for the executive team as well. Because it's not easy to tell an executive team that I'm going to be taking 5% of my budget, 10% of my budget, deploy it on testing because I want to learn, right? I have to frame this in a way that every time there's a question being asked about the MMM accuracy without testing, I will never be able to provide you the right answers. I'd be bluffing if I give you an answer without testing or without having the ground truth. So having two educational efforts, one with marketing, one with executives, is very important to make testing fun. Once I have the buy-in, we have to agree on what is the right pace by which we would get the highest ROI from testing. Especially for highly complex products where they have a lot of markets, a lot of brands, like HelloFresh, for example, it's very important that we understand what are the quick wins. Where do we need to test now? Because we have the highest spending levels in these markets, because we have lack of knowledge in these channels, because we have a question mark about the MMM outcome in these geographies. So being able to explain how you could use your Media Mix model to understand the gaps that need to be tested is very important. As soon as you connect testing to Media Mix model calibration, it resonates with the marketing team. So if one channel is getting undercredited because it has never been tested before, and you run a geo test or conversion left test, and you understand the true ICAC or the incremental CAC, and you calibrate your Media Mix model, then they see the value out of it. So for me, I think education plus buy-in on the pace by which we're moving and how we're using the results are the three-step process I tend to use to make testing fun wherever I go.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. I think the point that you made about the 5 to 10% of your budget and being able to really explain clearly that, hey, this is not just like throwaway money, that you're actually getting ROI out of it. And here's the, how to think about the ROI of the testing program itself is critical. And then it becomes addictive, right? Because now, like, if you're in the pursuit of truth And every quarter, every month, you're like, hey, what about this test and what about that test? Because now you have a set sort of alignment from your execs and your marketing team. It allows for sort of freedom of thought and creativity and what else we could do. Mustafa, this has been amazing. Is there anything that you would like our audience to help you with? Are you open to connecting with others in the industry who's looking to learn? Can they find you on LinkedIn? I know you're a busy guy, so I don't want to overwhelm your LinkedIn, but if you are, like, let us know, and we're happy to send you some connections.
Absolutely. I'm a curious guy, so I'd love to meet new people, hear about their experiences. For me, this is the only way to learn. So I'm more than happy to connect with more people and hear their stories and how they are tackling marketing science.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mustafa. Well, there you go, folks. That was Mustafa, Global Director of Data for the marketing team at HelloFresh. We'll have many more fun and insightful conversations, so tune in again next week. See you then.